Jethro rewarded by Ginzberg. Although the installation of elders on Moses' part came to pass in accordance with the command of God, still it was Jethro upon whose advice Moses besought God to lighten his burden and to permit him partly to transfer the leadership of the people to others. 166 Hence, he did not conceal the name of the advisor, but announced it to all the people, and immortalized him as such in the Holy Scriptures, for he deemed it praiseworthy to appreciate duly the merits of others. 167 It had, however, been part of God's scheme to reward Jethro for the love he bore the Torah, and for this reason did he allow it to come to pass that Moses had to have his attention called to the plan of installing the elders through his father-in-law, that the Holy Scriptures might devote a whole chapter to the plan of Jethro. 168. This, however, is not the only reward for Jethro's piety, who, in his love for the Torah, excelled all proselytes. A miracle occurred on the very first day of his arrival in camp, for manna in his honor descended at the noon hour, the hour of his arrival, and moreover, in as great quantities as was wont to rain down for 60 myriads of Israelites. He did not have to exert himself to gather the food, for it came over his body, so all he had to do was to carry his hand to his mouth to partake of it. 169 Jethro, nevertheless, did not remain with Moses, but returned to his native land. Moses, of course, tried to persuade his father-in-law to stay. He said to him, "Do not think that we shall continue to move thus slowly through the desert. Nay, we shall now move directly to the promised land." Only to urge Jethro to stay longer with them did Moses use the words, "we move," so that his father-in-law might believe that Moses too would enter the promised land, for otherwise he would hardly have allowed himself to be persuaded to join the march to Palestine. Moses continued, "I do not want to mislead thee, hence I will tell thee that the land will be divided only among the 12 tribes, and that thou hast no claim to possession of lands. But God bade us be kind to the proselytes, and to thee we shall be kinder than to all other proselytes." Jethro, however, was not to be persuaded by his son-in-law, considering himself in duty bound to return to his native land. For the inhabitants of his city had for many years made a habit of having him store their valuable, as none possessed their confidence in such a measure as he. If he had stayed still longer with Moses, people would have declared that he had absconded with all these things and fled to Moses to share it with him, and that would have been a blot on his fair name and that of Moses. Jethro had furthermore made many debts during the year in which he came to Moses. For owing to the hail God had sent upon Egypt before the exodus of Israel, a great famine had arisen in Jethro's home too, and he had found himself obliged to lend money for the support of the poor. If he were not now to return to his home, people would say that he had run away in order to evade his creditors, and such talk concerning a man of piety would have been desecration of the divine name. So he said to Moses, "There are people who have a fatherland, but no property there. There are also property holders who have no family, but I have a fatherland, and have property there as well as a family. Hence I desire to return to my fatherland, my property, and my family." But Moses would not yield so soon, and said to his father-in-law, "If thou dost not accompany us as a favor, I will command thee to do so, that the Israelites might not say thou hadst been converted to our religion only in the expectation of receiving a share in the promised land, but hadst returned to thy home. When thou didst discover that proselytes have no claim on property in the Holy Land, through thy refusal to move with us, thou wilt give the heathens an opportunity to say that the Jews do not accept proselytes, since they did not accept even their own king's father-in-law, but allowed him to return to his own land. Thy refusal will injure the glory of God, for the heathens will keep away from the true faith. But if thou wilt wander with us, I assure thee that thy seed shall share with us the temple, the Torah, and the future reward of the pious. How canst thou, moreover, who hast seen all the miracles of God wrought for us during the march through the desert, who wert a witness of the way in which even the Egyptians became fond of us, how canst thou now depart from us? It is a sufficient motive for thee to remain with us, in order to officiate as a member of the Sanhedrin and teach the Torah. We, on our part, want to retain thee, only that thou mightest in difficult cases enlighten our eyes. For thou wert the man who gave us good and fair counsel, to which God himself could not refuse his assent. Jethro replied, "A candle may glow in the dark, but not when the sun and the moon. Of what avail would my candlelight be? I had therefore better return to my home city, that I may make proselytes of its inhabitants, instruct them in the Torah, and lead them under the wings of the Shekinah. Amid great marks of honor, and provided with rich gifts, Jethro returned to his home, where he converted his kinsmen and his compatriots to the belief in the true God, as he had intended. 170. The descendants of Jethro later settled in Palestine, where the fruitful land of Jericho was allotted to them as a dwelling place. After the capture of Palestine, the tribes, by mutual consent, agreed that the fertile strip of land at Jericho should fall to the share of the tribe on whose land the temple was to be erected. But when its erection was postponed for a long time, they agreed to allot this piece of land to Jethro's sons, because they, being proselytes, had no other possession in the Holy Land. 480 years did the descendants of Jethro dwell in Jericho, when, upon the erection of the temple at Jerusalem, they relinquished it to the tribe of Judah, who claimed it as an indemnity for the site of the temple. 171. Jethro's descendants inherited his devotion to the Torah, like him dedicating their lives entirely to its study. So long as Joshua lived, they sat at this master's feet, but when he died, they said, "We left our fatherland and came here only for the sake of studying the Torah. If we were now to spend our time in cultivating the soil, when should we study the Torah?" They therefore gave up their dwelling place in Jericho and moved to the cold, barren wilderness, to Jabez, who there had his house of instruction. But when they there beheld the priests, the Levites, and the noblest of the Jews, they said, "How can we, proselytes, presume to sit beside these?" Instead of sitting within the house of instruction, they remained at the entrance of it, where they listened to the lectures, and in this manner made further progress in the study of the Torah. One of the descendants of Jethro was Jonadab, son of Rechab, who, when he heard from a prophet that God would destroy the temple, bade all his children, as a token of mourning, to drink no wine, use no oil for anointing themselves, nor cut their hair, nor dwell in houses. The Rechabites obeyed this command of their sire, and as a reward for this, God made a covenant with them that their descendants should always be members of the Sanhedrin and teachers of Israel. The covenant with the Rechabites was even stronger than that with David, for to the house of the latter God promised to keep the covenant only if his descendants were pious, but he made an unconditional covenant with the Rechabites. God rewarded them for their devotion to him in this way, although they did not belong to the Jewish nation. From this, one can gather how great would have been their reward if they had been Israelites. 173.